How's it going, dads? Hope you're doing wonderfully well out there today. It is Vinty Firth here from Dad Camp, and today I want to talk a little bit about teenagers. So you might be a dad out there that has a teenager at the moment, that your father and a teenager, your parent and a teenager, and you might be realizing right now that this is a really challenging experience. I have been a youth worker for 15 years. And I've worked with all types of young people and going through all different types of experiences and challenges. So I've ridden the roller coaster of what it's like to work with teenagers, and I've also got a teenage daughter myself, and I am smack bang at the beginning of parenting the teenage years. Just from the outset, one of the things that really stand out for me is that as fathers, we got to realize that our role changes as our kids enter into different stages of their life. And the teenage years are really about us adopting a role of mentor. The early years is really about teaching and discipline. But when our kids become teenagers, it's about mentoring. It's about drawing out from within. It's about asking questions and coming alongside our teenagers. You know, parenting teenagers is a challenge, and like I said, it is a little bit like a roller coaster. You know, it always reminds when I think about teenagers, I'm always reminded of Kevin and Perry. You know, a moment that he turns into a teenager. Oh, it's not fair. You know, all that kind of stuff. And you know, I can see that in my teenage girl at the moment, where she is seeking more independence. She is voicing her mind a little bit more. She's asking for more independence and all that kind of stuff. And really, dads, it's about in this season. It's about how we show up as dads, how we keep that relationship alive, and keep investing and pouring into our kids, even when things are difficult, even when they're pushing our buttons, even when we feel like we're getting it wrong. It's about that consistency of showing up again and again. So I want to share with you just three ways to keep that connection with your teenager through this season. So the first thing is this: it's to really begin to understand what's going on inside their brain. The second thing is to build trust and communication, and to do that effectively. And the last thing is just around boundaries, and that enable connection and lead to growth and not control. So let's get started. Let's get kicked in with the very first one. The very first one is to understand the teenage brain. So before you can even get into discipline, it's important to take a step back, I think, and understand your teenager from a wider or perspective, or from a top-down approach, whatever that phrase is, I don't know. When you're a teenager, your brain isn't fully developed. It's still in the middle of developing. Right at the very front of your brain, you've got the prefrontal cortex, and that part of the brain is responsible for judgment, impulse control. It's responsible for long-term thinking, and that is still forming, and it won't be fully formed until you're in your mid-20s. So there's a lot of stuff going on underneath the surface in your teenager's brain, and that's why teenagers sometimes can be a little bit more impulsive. They're emotionally reactive. They maybe struggle to think long term about the consequences of things. So, you know, they're doing things that we are like, my goodness, I didn't think they would do that. And that's to do with this prefrontal cortex still developing. There's another part of the brain called the amygdala, and that's your flight and fight response. And that processes fear and aggression. And that part of the brain is really active when you're a teenager. So that means that our teenagers have really strong emotional reactions to things. And they're still trying to develop the ability to regulate all of these emotions, which is why sometimes our teenagers fly off the handle sometimes. So it probably explains a little bit of what is going on in terms of some of the behaviours you might see. So When your teenager pushes back, which is going to happen, or whether your teenager is acting impulsively, or whether they ignore you, or whatever it is that they're doing, it's not necessarily an act of defiance. They're not necessarily doing that, to annoy you or to get back at you. It's a natural part of the development. They're trying to figure out at this stage, and you'll remember this if you look back in your own life, back to when you were a teenager. They're actually trying to figure out who they are, how they fit into the world. They're trying to make sense of the world. They're trying to understand how to make decisions. And they're all big tasks, big questions that some of us, even as adults, are still grappling with, particularly that first one. Who am I? Who am I? So it's really important at these stages that we create a safe space for our kids. And first of all, that begins with ourselves being able to be aware emotionally of what's going on for us when our kids are pushing our buttons, or when they're reacting in a way that we don't want them to react. So that requires us to actually respond with a little bit of empathy, and not be in this place of always wanting to correct all the time. And that is an easy place for me to parent from. So I'm speaking to myself when I'm saying this, that I need to be more empathetic with my kids, and I want to be a father that is empathetic, that is giving guidance, that is patient, and most importantly, that I'm just present, and that I'm there for them. I'm a steady anchor, a steady place for them. And as I said, that begins with understanding there's a lot going on for them at a neurological level, and to have a little bit of empathy. So really just meeting them where they're at, and seeing them as a human being that's growing and developing, that's wrestling with their own identity and their own independence, and to be that safe space. So the second point is to build trust and communicate with respect. And as we all know, and as I've already said, your teenagers are craving that independence. They're almost wanting to separate away from you, away from the family, and that's why teenage years, friendship circles become so much more important, and what's happening outside of the house becomes so much more important. Now, just because they are transitioning in that direction doesn't mean that your role is less important, but your role is so crucially important as a father here, because even though they crave that independence, they also crave connection. And although they're searching for connection outside of the house, what's most important is they have the connection inside of the house, because they might not say this to you, but they need to know that you are a safe place for them. They need to know that no matter what, they are connected to you, that you will create that open space for them, that they are welcome in the house, that they are loved in the house, that they have that safe space. Because teenage years can be scary as you're navigating all of this new territory, and you're having these new experiences, and you're asking those big life questions. So trust is at the center of building this safe space. It's the foundation piece. And if your kids can't trust you, if they can't trust that you're going to listen to them rather than shutting them down, if they feel like when they come to you, you're going to judge them, or you're just going to constantly correct them, or you're going to nag at them, or you're going to pressure them, they're just going to pull away, and that connection, that relationship could begin to fray, and ultimately could end up being lost. Now, your kids will pull away from you, but it's so important that you don't pull away from them, that you stay there grounded and centered and ready in that space to welcome them back with open arms when they need you. So the question really is, how do you build trust? How do you build trust? Well, the first thing is you just got to listen. You got to listen. Now, when I say listen, I mean really listen. I have a friend who is a fantastic listener. Sometimes when I'm speaking to her, I'm like, gosh, how did you even pick that up? How did you hear that? And because when she's listening, she is present, she is engaged in the conversation. She isn't just waiting for her turn to speak. She's not caught up in her own mind and her own assumptions about things and the things that she thinks and the things that she wants to say. She's not caught up in here, but she remains centered and connected in here. So if you really want to hear what your kids are saying, that you really got to listen. Move away from the head and get into your heart, and listen to the words that they're saying, but also listen to what they're not saying. Pick up on it, tap in to their energy and tap into what they're not saying, and ask questions. Ask questions. The other part of this, as well as listening, is to demonstrate respect. So respect goes both ways. We want our kids to respect us, but we must also respect our kids. So what does that look like? Well, it means like asking about how they're feeling. It means acknowledging their feeling. It means including them in decisions, asking their opinion about things. When they do speak, listen to them. Maybe respecting boundaries in their house, not in their house, sorry, respecting boundaries in the house. But we must really look at our kids as human beings and offer them the same respect that we would offer other people. Our kids need us to be consistent and fair. Now, in the past, I probably was consistent but harsh. And as my eldest daughter's moving into teenage years, and I'm seeing and realizing that I need to be consistent, but I also need to be fair. So what does that mean? It means if you make a promise, keep it. If you say you're going to do something, keep it. If you say you're going to take her out somewhere, keep it. Just, I promised that I would take Elsie out and buy her a new Bible. I didn't keep that promise on the day that I said I was going to do it. It took a little while longer. But keep your promises, and if you set consequences, follow through on them. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, because your teenagers, they need a structure that they can count on, because everything else is like out of balance. So they need that safe structure, that safe place, that kind of boundary that holds them safely in place, if that makes sense. And so let's look a little bit about communication. How do you actually communicate well? Here's a couple of practical strategies. One is ask questions. Now, there's different types of questions you can ask. The two main are, you could ask an open-ended question, or you could ask a closed question. So a closed question could be, did you have a good day today? So the answer could either be yes or no. An open-ended question might be like, what was the best part of your day today? So that opens up the dialogue, it opens up conversation. Or you might ask, what's been on your mind today, or what made you laugh today in school? So it's learn to ask more open-ended questions and open up that dialogue and create that room for your teenager to be able to talk and to be able to communicate. Now, the reality is that sometimes your teenager won't want to communicate. So one of the things that I'm currently remembering and learning is that you got to know your child. So my eldest daughter, if I asked her what was the best part of your day today, straight after school, she would say, I don't know. And it's because she is just out of school and she's tired and she's been talking all day and she's been learning all day. And the last thing that she wants to do is to be quizzed and to be questioned by her dad. So I got to be okay with that, and I am okay with that. So I know with Elsie, the most important thing for me as her father is to give her a warm welcome when I see her, to say hello, to tell her I missed her, to ask that question anyway, and if I get that response, I know that at some point during the day she will come back to me and we will have that conversation once she needs to decompress. So your child might actually need to decompress before you have a conversation. Or maybe you notice that conversations are more fluid if when you're out in the park or when you're going for a walk. But conversation, learn to ask open-ended questions, and that's going to open up the dialogue and give them space to talk. It's a bit like what I said a few moments ago. Let them finish their thoughts, even if you know exactly what it is they're going to say. Let them finish what they're saying and resist the temptation to jump in and to finish their sentences. And I say this in most videos: be patient and be present. Just sometimes what our teenagers need is for us just to be there, and sometimes it's okay that there is silence. Silence is okay. For some of us men, we don't like silence. We're trying to fill the silences, but silence can be okay. Just be present, be there, ask the questions, and sometimes you'll get an answer, and sometimes you won't. This last point I find really important, and particularly I think raising kids, yes, in general, but in particular I think with young women, and I've seen dads do this wrong actually, and when we're raising our teenagers, we've got to avoid criticism. Nobody likes to be criticized, and nobody likes their parents to be on their back all the time telling them what they've done wrong, or how terrible it is, or how their room's always messy, or how they never pick up their shoes. And it's what type of environment do you want to create in your house? Do you want to create an environment that's heavy, or do you want to create an environment that's light? Do you want your kids to come to you with things, or do you want them to avoid you because they're afraid of what you might say to them? So avoid criticizing, just be open and be there. This last point is around setting boundaries. So boundaries are so crucially important. Boundaries aren't about control, but boundaries in your teenage years are about guidance. Your teenagers will need guidance, and sometimes they'll come to you for it, and most of the time they won't. Sometimes they'll go to the youth workers or trusted adults outside of the home, and that's okay. But part of the teenage years is about pushing the boundaries, because that's how they learn and that's how they grow. But we gotta know what the boundaries are, and we gotta communicate that with our kids, with our teenagers, and possibly even include them in that, because ultimately we still gotta guide and we still gotta teach. And if boundaries are broke, then we gotta follow through. We got to follow through with consequences, and it's not about getting angry and getting agitated and telling them and shouting at them, but it's about being calm, being connected, and being consistent. And if a rule is broke, you just respond in a calm, peaceful way without any emotional reactions. So at the heart of all of this is about that connection and about keeping that relationship at the front and at the center, and building trust with your teenagers. Listen, it's hard work, but it's important work. We gotta dig deep. We gotta stay in there. We gotta keep that connection and keep that presence. We gotta remain calm. We gotta remain patient. And that will create that safe space for our teenagers to feel like they can come back to us and have that relationship as a steady, solid thing in their life. Listen, if this resonated with you, I want you to just drop a comment below. Let me know one thing that stood out for you, or if there's anything else that you think is important when raising teenagers. There's lots of stuff that hasn't been covered, I know, but they were the three top ones that popped into my head today. If you know a father that you think would benefit from this message, then pass it on to them. And don't forget to like, to share, and to subscribe. And keep on this fatherhood journey. Your role is so crucially important. And remember, dads, you've got what it takes. Adios.